Right, well, another year's gone by, and it's been an eventful kind of year. It's had its ups and downs, that's for sure. And I'd like to start off, obviously, by thanking all of you out there who are still here watching this channel. Without you, there wouldn't be a channel, so thank you to the viewers, thank you to the subscribers, and thank you to the Patreons. You all help to make this channel what it is. Now, today I was actually going to do highlights like I do each year. And it kind of is, but it kind of isn't. This is going to be a completely different format this year. We're not just going to show off like the best catches we had, and I'm sort of a bit tired of doing that. But we are going to show some of it. We'll show parts of last year, and we will show new footage as well. And at the same time, I'm going to answer a few questions that I get asked over the year, because I get asked so many questions, and I can't address them, like I say, all the time. So anyway, we're going to start off with the beginning of last year, which is going to be the same as this year. We're going to be heading out, we're going foraging, and that'll be happening in, from now, I think it's about in 2 weeks' time, possibly. I need to check how big the tides are and when they are, but that's what we're going to do. So we're going to start off with when we went down coastal foraging for ormers. Now ormers they're known as green ormers, or a species of abalone, or if you want to get scientific, they're called Haliotis tuberculata. And we basically find them here on the beach on the biggest of low tides. They grow to around about 13 centimeters, because quite often people say, oh, they seem small, but that is as big as they get, basically. There's a sponge which will kill them when they get bigger, and we're not allowed to take them until they're at least 8 centimeters, and we can only take them between January and the end of April, and there's only certain tides, full moon, new moon, 2 days after. It's quite a complicated thing, but there's a book that tells you when and how you can collect these. Like I say, anything under the sea that you can't reach on those specific days, at a specific size obviously, and anything you cannot reach without going under the water. You're not allowed to go under the water, basically. You can go up to your neck and grab them, but the moment your head goes under, you are illegally taking them, and you will be fined. And don't think that other ormer gatherers won't be phoning up people to let them know what you're doing, because they will. Because the thing is, many years ago they almost wiped the ormers out. They dived for them, they exported them, they did all this, and it was a disaster. So they brought in all these tight restrictions, and people know what happened back in those years, and people remember. And of course a lot of people don't want to see this sort of thing going on. And of course, if you go after the ormers, make sure you turn back as many rocks as you can. You know, I know we all understand you can't get all the rocks back, because, you know, some rocks are just too heavy, or they flip over, or things happen. But try to get them back carefully without damaging what's underneath. So anyway, this was a trip, well, this was trips we did for the ormer. Oh, there's one. Right there. Look at that beauty. Ah, it's one of them ones that you get it part of the way up. There is ormers under it. I can feel them. So this bad boy's going over. Right. Get psyched for this. I want this over because I want to see what's under this one. Let's try one arm. Okay, we can hold it. There's only 1, 2, but look at this, 3. One's just fallen off. Holy cow, they're big. They're giant. Look at those beauties. You can see that in there. Check out that massive ormer sitting on the rock there. They've walked straight past that and completely missed it. I'll hook him out. It's coming on. There we go. Got him out. I mean, look at that. That is one of our biggest ormers of the day. It probably is the biggest ormer. I mean, that is huge. And they completely walked past that. Now there's an interesting find which I've never come across. I've never come across that before, ever. Look at that, it's a sea cucumber. incredible is that? Like I said, I've never actually seen one of these. It does, it looks like a gherkin. That is amazing. Sea cucumber. Don't know what type, like I say, I've never come across them. I'm going to put him back anyway. I'll put him over here out the way down there. There he goes. Wow. See, after all these years, and I'm still finding new things. Lovely big ormers. Now, once you've got your ormers and your abalone, and if you take the time to prepare them properly, you can make what I consider to be one of the finest dishes on this planet. It's basically undescribable, the flavour you get. Now, you can mess it up very easily if you put a little bit too much water in, if you overcook them, if you don't cook them enough. All these things will affect it, but if you get it right, I would say it's, for me anyway, it is the most tastiest dish you could ever have. Okay, there you have it. So you've got your bacon just on top there, which will taste exactly like the ormers, and then you've got your ormers down here. That's the dish finished, basically. So we're going to serve that up, and I'll tell you now, if you could smell what I'm smelling now, it is just utterly amazing smell. So there you go, one plate of ormers with some fresh garden potatoes and some peas. And this was worth all the hard work that goes into collecting them. Now, occasionally, when you're out looking for the abalone, you'll come across the odd lobster. Then again, that could be size. Look at that. One lobster. You know, that probably is size. But anyway, it was nice to see you, Mr. Lobster. Or Mrs. Lobster. What are you? Mr. Lobster. Mr. Lobster. And we're going to put you back. There you go. Go back in your hole. We'll see you in the summer. But most of the time the lobsters will only be this sort of size. How's that for the smallest lobster you've ever seen? Back you go. So, if you go after the ormers and you go after the lobsters, you'll need a hook. Now, this does both, basically. If you're going after lobster, you really want a long hook, because most lobsters will be right back in holes that you can't get back under. You don't often find lobsters under stones. I say you don't. You do find them, but usually they're small ones. Most of the bigger lobsters will be in actual holes or under giant boulders that you can't lift over. Now, with these hooks, they are blunt here, and this back is flattened a little bit. I don't know if you can see that. It's tapered, and it's also very, very blunt, because you do not want a flap that you cut the ormer. If you cut the ormer and you let it go again, the ormer could bleed to death, so you don't want to do that. You want to be as careful as possible. And the same with lobsters. Now, when you look for lobsters in holes, when you put your hook in, you've got to put it in the hole and be very, very gentle, very, very careful when you're looking. If you put the hook in, usually the lobster, if there's a decent lobster, it'll grab the hook. You'll feel it pulling on the hook. Same with crab. And you can, just tapping it, you can hear it, just gently. The thing is, a lot of lobsters will go in holes to change their shells, and they hide in the holes to get away from everything, obviously predators and that. So if you stick your hook in and the lobster is like jelly, or its shell's too soft, you can break the lobster. And I've seen broken lobsters where people have gone in like this, and there's broken claws from a lobster that wasn't big enough, yet they killed the lobster or damaged it so much by being too rough. So when you put a hook in a hole, very careful with that, and particularly if you ever go in the summer looking for lobsters, because that's the time a lot of lobsters will be changing their shells. And even if the shell is hard sometimes, it's still not good enough, and you wouldn't want to take them, because you'll feel it when you pick them up, the shell will flex. Those sort of lobsters, they'll be full of water, so it's pointless taking the lobster. So like I say, whenever you stick a hook in a hole looking for things, don't bang it around in there. Do it carefully and use your ears, listen, or feel the vibrations on the hook when it grabs the hook. That's the best way to do it. It's the same with ormers. If you're going for ormers, you put a hook in a hole for ormers, you put it in, you're listening for like the cracking sound as the ormer moves, as it tightens down. And you can feel the soft foot if you're very careful. But that's all about learning, like I say, how to use these things. Now on the end of this we put a gauge on. This is a gauge for a lobster, and it's also a gauge for ormer. The ormer's inside, the lobster's the back part. I got a notch in it. And 2 of these would do a crab. Now my gauges are always slightly bigger than the minimum size. That way it saves. I'm not worried about things which are right on the gauge. I mean, you know, it's pointless taking something that's right on the gauge. Just make your gauge a millimetre bigger, then you won't run into any problems with illegal ormers or illegal lobsters. Like I say, if you just round your hook over at the end there, you can just tie your string in like that. And also, you'll find that once you round it like that, just that, even that string there, when you're pulling, you can actually pull stones up with the hook that you don't want to reach down into the water. So it makes it useful for that. If you heat your metal up to bend the hook like that, make sure you hammer it plenty afterwards. That'll harden the metal again, because obviously heating the metal will soften it. You can see this hook is very thin, but this hook has pulled over some pretty big rocks before. And this is only steel. You don't need stainless. If you make it out of stainless, you're making more work for yourself, because stainless is much harder to work with than steel. And this hook is this hook's probably 20 years old. And I had some about 10 years ago which I lost, which were my father's, and they were from the 60s, 70s, might have even been older than that. He made up 4 of them back then. So yeah, so there you go, that's an ormering hook, or lobster hook. Lobster hook, like I say, you probably want to make yourself like a longer one, because like I say, most lobsters will be in holes you can't get them out. They go right back in under great big boulders and that, and your arm and your hook isn't long enough. And of course, along with lobsters and ormers, you can go looking for razorfish. Obviously you're very time limited, because you normally have to decide what you're going to go for, and this is why you don't see a lot of foraging for razors, that kind of thing. I mean, you could go in the summer again, but again, you really need the biggest of tides if you want to be serious about finding some. You'll find 1 or 2 when the tides aren't so big, but we don't have an awful lot, because of our mixed ground. You know, we have a lot of rock here as well, so you have to sort of find those sandy patches or areas where they exist. But we did go down, and we did go looking for razor along with some gaper clams. Here he comes. You'll see that the sand is starting to lift. There he comes. Up he comes. They literally will come out, literally throw themselves onto the sand. If we give it a minute. Any minute now. And you see he's come completely out the sand. And all you got to do, pick him up. So basically you walk around pouring in the holes. You can use dry salt if your holes stay open. If your holes don't stay open, you can mix up a salty solution, just add a bit of water. So you've got like a slush, and that'll do the trick as well. So we've got 3. Do we need any more? There we go. Absolute beauty, that one. So we've got 3 of these now. We're about to get a 4th one.
Yeah, 2 more animals.
Yeah, look. No, that's razor. There's one in front of it as well.
There he is.
Yeah, there it is.
What a beauty.
Razor, lovely big one. Perfect. Of course, after the shore, then the boat went down. And one thing that always turns up, usually early-ish in the spring, is the spider crab. Now, how good they are varies from year to year. Some years, I mean, one year I had 1 decent male. That was one of the worst years. In fact, there was a drop over a few years. Apparently there was some netting going on. They discovered where all the spiders were out in the deeps. Basically they netted the hell out of it with crab nets. And that next 2 or 3 years we barely saw spiders. You know, it was awful. I even went diving and I saw 3 spider crabs, and I dived about 8 or 9 times. Normally you'd see the seabed full of them. That's how bad it was. But the last few years have been pretty good, so maybe they put the You know, maybe they've stopped that, or I have noticed the spider crabs are hanging around all year, so maybe that's what's saving them, because they're not getting netted by the giant commercial factory kind of boats further out to sea. The local boats, I mean, they fish for them and that, yes, but they don't go mad for them, you know, they don't take everything, so that's probably what's helping a little bit. But anyway, spider crabs. There's our big crab. There we go. Giant crab. Absolute busters, these ones. You don't get much bigger. Not in the pots anyway. Wow, some big crab in here today, I tell you. That beaut. Another huge crab. There you go, spider crabs. Now, I get some comments from people in America about spider crabs, aren't they toxic and all this sort of thing, or not toxic but contaminated, because I believe they get an algae sometimes which contaminates the crab there, or it might be heavy metals or something, I don't know. But no, we don't get that here. The spider crab are perfectly good to eat, and when they come in here, they're travelling in to breed, and they are in perfect condition. They're at their hardest point with the shell, and basically in prime condition. Later on, you don't want to eat them because they get kind of ammonia-y, like later on in the year. So basically the crabbing sort of starts in March, April, May, usually March, April, somewhere around there, from the shore area. And then they stay prime until about July, maybe get to August. It changes every year, depends on the weather and stuff. But by that time, you kind of don't want them anymore. You will get the odd one, but the flavour gets a bit iffy, and if they've bred, you'll see the shells are starting to get really sort of brittly damaged, and there's like little chips on the shells, worn out kind of thing, and they'll go off and change their shells, the males then. And females, males, you can take both. I tend not to bother with the females. I do take maybe 3 a year, something like that. But that's because there's some people over here, or 1 or 2 people that really like the females. They prefer the female to the male, and they also like the roe in female. And there's nothing wrong with taking some. I mean, people say it's the future, but you've got to think, people over here with small boats, small pots, it's not affecting the stocks in the slightest. What affects the stocks is when you get great big commercial boats from Europe that lay 50 miles of gill or crab nets, tangle nets, where the crabs will march, because they march in big numbers and just literally walk into the nets, and they'll be pulling hundreds of thousands of crabs out. That's where the problem lies. And then quite often when people make comments and remarks about taking a fish or ruining it, I mean, I had a comment about mackerel, how I'm destroying the mackerel stocks. Somebody like that who makes a comment like that has no idea or doesn't understand the scale of things. When a guy goes out, when all of Guernsey boats go out and they all caught 100 mackerel, you think, wow, that's a lot of mackerel. It's not when you see a factory ship sucking out millions of tons a day, you know, or hundreds of tons a day, with a vacuum cleaner pretty much. I mean, the amount of fish they catch in one of their trips is probably Guernsey's quota for the next, I say quota, but Guernsey's mackerel catch for the next 10-20 years. That's the scale you're dealing with. So yeah, sometimes people have got to keep a perspective on it. I mean, the thing is with my fishing, I always try to keep a balance. I like to put stuff back, but I also take stuff, and there has to be this balance. I don't necessarily agree with either way. You know, I could sit here and say, I mean, obviously there's greed out there where people want to strip everything out they can get. But then there's other people as well that preach to me who put every fish back, and then I sort of look at it and say, well, why are you sticking hooks in fish as well if you're only going to put everything back? So I always believe there has to be a balance. I mean, I've got no problem with sort of the commercial side of it. I've got no problem with the returning side of it. But I do have a problem when people go to extremes, like the commercial goes to the factory level, where they're just stripping everything out. That's where the balance is broken. And everything in life is balance. And if you muck that balance up, there's nothing left for the future. Or you'll do so much damage. And the people doing this damage, they're not fishermen. These are corporations, these are companies, these are banks, these are the stock market. You know, it's all about the money. It's not about getting fish. I mean, you don't bring in millions of tons of mackerel and then dump it on the land as fertiliser, because that's the point it's got to. There's no market for it to sell it as a food source because they're scooping up so much. So what do? Oh, we'll get a few pence for it, we'll turn it into fertiliser. That sort of behaviour has got to stop. Otherwise, there's no hope. A bit like a mackerel. That's because it is mackerel. Lots of them. The mackerel are coming back this way by the looks of it. Lovely smoked mackerel. Now, you'll see that they're brown, but they're not overly brown. Now, if you want to make them more brown, you just add a bit more wood chippings. Like I say, I prefer my mackerel not overly smoked. I find it, like I say, it's too overpowering. But this will be perfect. But I'm not going to eat them now because I'm going to be putting them on a plate, letting them cool down, and then later we'll have them when they're cold. And it will probably be a smoked mackerel sandwich or something. If you haven't tried that, you should. It is delicious. This one's a bit stuck. And the last one. There we go. Smoked mackerel. Delicious. And of course there's the people's favourite, the mackerel. Unfortunately the mackerel just don't turn up in numbers anymore. You just get small shoals that appear here and there, and it's a very sad state of affairs, I'm afraid. Governments do nothing to stop the factory ships, and they're basically stripping the seas clean. And you know, I feel more sorry for the animals like the sharks, the dolphins, the seals, all these things which are going to struggle. In fact, I think that's why we're getting so many of those. We get a lot of seals now, a lot of dolphins, and they're always around the shores, and I think they're around the shores feeding on the young fish which live in the bays and that, because they're struggling to find their natural food, which is things like big shoals of mackerel. There's been an explosion in whitebait shoals, that's for sure. You see a lot of those, and again I think knock-on effect that there's not enough mackerel that are feeding on the whitebait. But governments refuse to do anything because purely and simply it's a commodity, and you know, these ships aren't fishermen, they're just basically companies and organisations making millions of pounds killing off the mackerel and dumping it on the land as fertiliser. They don't even eat half of it. So you know, that has to be stopped. But obviously when it comes to money, people don't care. So then of course there's the brown crab. Now the brown crab is that's one that really has been disappearing, and I think it's just too much pressure on the seabed, too many things running along the seabed, too many, you know, nets and things catching them, and too many machines running through them. I mean, you're not even seeing the small ones anymore, and it's getting quite depressing, that, because every year the crab just seems to get lower and lower. I mean, I did have some nice ones, but they were very far and few between. Now, this is a crab you don't want grabbing hold of you, not unless you want to lose your fingers. Look at that for a gem of a crab. It's going to be £4 or £5, that one. Absolute beauty. And in the bay as well, of all places. It's a good solid one as well, nice and hard. See all the barnacles on it there? That means it's got an old shell. And on that side as well, under the back there. That is a gem of a crab. Right, I've got to keep him separate from everybody else because he will do some damage if he gets hold of things, or other crabs. And of course, who could forget the lobsters in the pots? That's a good lobster too. Oh. Out of the way. Yeah, that's a lovely lobster, that one. So a nice big shanker crab, or brown edible crab, and a lovely big male lobster. Perfect. Right, so I just have to do a quick battery change. Sit that bad boy out. Right, good. Look at the size of that. This could be at least £5. That one. Absolute beauty. Yeah, extreme close up. That is a absolute cracker. Absolute cracker, that one. There you go. Little crawfish, or crayfish, or spiny lobster, whatever you want to call them. They are spiny, I tell you that much. But they are awesome little creatures. Love these things. This is what my grandmother used to like seeing me bringing. Not one this small, obviously, but huge, great one. This is aquarium size. So we're going to let this one go anyway. That rope's gone yet. Okay, getting back. I'm going to get my other camera for this because I want to shot him when he goes in. These antennae got very sharp blades on them. And away he goes. Now, during the year, we also made some lures, and of course we took the lures out and we tested the lures. Does silicone work? You tell me. And the lures were very successful. Those silicone lures did really well. I mean, I still use my other lures. I use cable lures, you know, the cable casing of lures. That works very well as well. And of course, then we went and we made some plugs for the bass. Araldite it in to the front of the lure like that. So this one's got, like I say, a curve in the front, which you probably can't see. I'm not going to bother polishing up these bibs because, like I say, these are only prototypes. That one there as well, it's got a smaller bib. This one's left flat. I haven't hollowed that one because this lure's quite flat anyway, so it should be able to stabilise in the water. Oh yeah! Here we go, our first bass on the homemade lures. It's not a big one, but none of them are, so I'm pleased at that. They do work. Well, picks up a slightly bigger fish though, being a bigger lure. And there you go. Homemade lures. Work a treat. And as you saw, they worked as well, so I was very pleased about those because they can be tricky to get the swimming right and that, to get the the shape right and things. Because I noticed short, stumpy lures don't tend to work quite as well as longer lures. We also had the real wobbler. He's a professional lure maker, and he made up those mackerel ones and sent me one over or a couple over to try, and they were good. They were very good. Here we go. they certainly swallow the lure. There we go. That's a lovely bass. That's got to be £6 or so, this one. Let's get it under control. Thing is, they gulp this lure down. But part of that, I think, is because it's got small hooks. I think I'd rather put bigger hooks on the lure, but the lure itself obviously works. I'll be back in a second. I'll get this free. Tell you what, I'll show you as it is like this, then I'll free it. Look at that. Look at that. And that was on the real wobbler. See, right down it went. They absolutely gulped this lure. So far I'm very impressed with this lure. Very impressed. Now when I say they were good, I remember a comment, somebody said they couldn't justify the price of one because they are quite expensive. But you've got to remember they are handmade, which, you know, obviously is going to bump the price up. And they couldn't justify it. And I thought, yeah, I was a bit sceptical at first about that. But that first lure caught somewhere in the region of between 150 and 200 bass. So I think I could justify that. You know, that was before I say it caught that. It was before I lost it. So I actually did lose it. I cast it and I snapped it, and I went to go and get it. I couldn't find it. You know, the lure's there, floats. I couldn't see it. But the good thing about those lures is they're made of wood, so kind of environmentally friendly. The hooks will rust away, the wood will rust away, and then I think you've got a bit of stainless. Yeah, so they are kind of better. And I think, personally, I'm all in favour of wooden plugs. I used wooden plugs years ago, they're fantastic. Then they've switched to plastic and, I mean, you get good ones and bad ones, mixed results. But I would prefer to use wooden lures. But that lure was fantastic, and yeah, I'll leave a link to him down below if you want to, because you can go and buy them if you like. But like I say, a little bit pricey, but they are justified in the price, I think, anyway. So today's lesson is how to catch a bass on a lure. You get a lure like that, you get a rod like that, a reel like that, and you whack it that way into the water, and you reel slowly. And bish bash bosh, you hook a fish. There you go, one small bass. Oh, no. Come on. Get it in. Oh, I got him. Ha-ha. Ha-ha. Again. About time I managed to get a big one in, because we've had a lot of small fish. Right, I need to get hold of this fish carefully. We've got him. There we go. Now that's a bass. Still there. Check this out, I've got two fish on the same hook, the same lure. Unbelievable. Check this out, I don't know if you can see that, two fish. Whoa, we've got them both. Check that out, two bass on one lure. That has happened once, I think it was last year. We've got a big one, look at that. I don't know if you can see that, I'll tip the camera down. one lure. One on the top hook, one on the bottom hook. That is amazing. Gotta be careful. Oh, that one's out. Gotta be careful when you've got two fish flapping on the same hook. Now, as some of you know, my grandmother died this year, and it was kind of strange in a way. Now, obviously, this probably has absolutely nothing to do with it whatsoever, but after she died and I started fishing back for the bass, it went crazy. I went out, I was catching so many fish, like the days after, and it was just unbelievable. And I just like to think that my grandmother may have pushed a few fish my way. You know, I obviously know it's probably got nothing to do with it, and it was just pure coincidence, but it was just weird that after she died and I went out fishing again, and bang, the fish. And the thing was, it didn't matter where I went. You know, I could go anywhere around there where I fish, down the south, down the west, in the bay. I was catching bass. It was just like, oh, just throw a line in the water, boop, out comes a bass. So, like I say, I just like to think that she was up there watching out and pushed a few fish that way, you know. Maybe not. It's a cuckoo wrasse. Female cuckoo wrasse. And as you would have seen, some superb weather some days, and of course there was other days which I don't normally go out on, but we did get quite a lot of wind, and it gets to a point where you have to go at some point. This is the rock, and the wave was going up, not quite over, but powering up over this way. The other thing, we'll go back and have a look. That rock's there. And as you would have seen, those were a few days which it definitely was not nice. You know, it was a bit sketchy. The problem is when you've had weather like that, you end up having to do things like this. Now, yeah, it was a bit sketchy going in there, but the thing is, the tide, I waited for the really big tide, it just happened to be calm enough. I say calm enough, you're still going to watch yourself, because you get the swell, obviously. Calm enough to recover the equipment. Now, it's not just about recovering it, because I knew it would be damaged and broken up, and I could have just abandoned it, but I don't like doing that. I like to get it out of the environment anyway. Recover what I can, but, you know, also get back the stuff that's in the water, chuck it in the bin, recycle parts that I can reuse. I do get people saying things like, you know, are you using plastic, or I use this, but the point being is I actually remove more rubbish every year from the oceans in my boat than I actually lose every year. You know, I might lose I mean, this year was obviously bad because I think some pots I'm certain they were taken as opposed to actually lost, but I mean, I did lose some in a storm. Usually I will lose maybe 1 or 2 pots every 2 or 3 years. That's about all I tend to lose. And I mean, like when you saw this, yes, it got smashed up, but I'm always able usually to recover my equipment. I did lose a set along there, which I know where it was, but it was just, that was too dangerous. I could not get in against the rock. It was right up against the cliff face, and it was being held down. So when the tide went up, where you could get a bit closer, the bobbers are under the water, so it was jammed in the rocks, so that one wasn't going to come out. But like I say, I do pull stuff out the ocean every year. Whenever I go past rubbish in the sea, you know, bottles, cans, bags, all this sort of stuff. I mean, 1, it's no good for the environment. 2, it's no good if you run into it. I mean, I pulled a great big plank out this year, although I don't know where the footage is for that. It was on one video, you might have seen it, this huge plank of wood, which wood's alright, I mean, you can leave wood in the sea, it's just a hazard. I pulled a pallet out, I pulled out, amount of plastic bags I pull out the sea. And you know, the most thing I actually come across and pull out the sea? Balloons. Yeah, balloons. Everything from, like, well, I say everything. I mean, I've had like the normal ones you just blow up, but quite often it's those helium ones, you know, the sort of silvery balloons. The amount of times I come across those in the ocean, you know, you wouldn't believe how many of those things I pull out of the ocean every year. And of course, you find some odd things as well. Well, I hope there wasn't somebody attached to that when it went in the sea. There, the goose barnacles on it. How cool is that? Been in the sea a long time. And of course we arrived at sort of not that long ago, with the later part of the year, where we usually go shore fishing, but I mean, we've had weather like this. So of course, as you saw, it's been raining, it's just non-stop since, well, September the 13th is when it all started, like the wind, the rain, and it hasn't stopped since. It's been pretty consistent. We did have 2 breaks, and both those breaks came on a couple of the smallest tides that were there. And I know where I was going fishing, for the sort of fishing I'd be doing, I might catch a baby pout, I might catch a baby conger, but that was basically what's going to happen. If I was very lucky, I might have caught something. But the tides for that area, it's very depth related where I fish for certain areas, and I knew that I'd just be probably wasting my time, and nobody really wants to sit through a fishing video without fish. I mean, you know, I'd rather, if you know, if I do trips where I don't catch fish, I'm not going to put it up. I mean, I've put the odd one up, but generally I just avoid putting those videos up, you know. I mean, I shoot enough footage anyway, so I don't need to worry about putting up a video with no content in it, really, apart from me standing there holding the fishing rod, which I'm sure you all want to watch me doing that, but, you know, I'm sure you'd like to see me catching fish as well. There we go, that's a nice one. Nice big bream. I'm feeling generous today. Right, back he goes. Eh? Let me have a look at this hook. Yeah, it's right down there. I think we might be cooking this one, you know. I'll see what I can do anyway. Lovely, fresh, Bream straight out to sea, cooked up. Let's have a look at our chestnuts while we're at it. These are going to be hot. Chestnuts are always hot. There we go. And our chestnuts. Now chestnuts, it doesn't matter if they're burnt a little bit. We don't eat them like that, of course we've got to take the shells off. But it doesn't matter if they're a little bit burnt because they'll be fine inside. Mind you, having said all that, we did get out and do a bit of fishing off the shore. So, have a great new year, and once again, thank you all for watching this channel. And we'll be back this year with loads more content, and hopefully better content. And if there's anything you want to see, leave it in the comments, and I'll see what I can do. And of course, we couldn't leave without seeing Fishcat and his crew. Oh, it's a hard life being a cat.